Well, as most of you in the room know, I'm Peter Hershock. I'm the director of the Asian Studies Development Program and the co-director, along with Roger Ames, of this conference, the 11th East-West Philosophers Conference. And it's my distinct honor and pleasure to be able to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, Dr. Sari Nusseibeh. He was a little difficult for me to figure out exactly how to introduce. It's difficult to introduce somebody who's been named one of the 100 most important intellectuals in the world. That's a tough person to sort of give due credence to, but I'll do the standard thing to begin with, and that's to say that he's professor of Islamic philosophy and past president of Al-Quds University in Jerusalem, and that he was educated at Oxford and at Harvard, and he's had a very long and distinguished career as a philosopher, as a political theorist, but also a very long career as someone who's engaged in political activity, political activism that is really aimed at bringing about more just and peaceful Arab-Israeli relations. And I think it's not an exaggeration at all to say that at the heart of his careers, both careers, has been place. In his book, Once Upon a Country, A Palestinian Life, Dr. Nusseibeh recalls a 1977 meeting between Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt, and Menachem Begin, who was at that time the prime minister of Israel. At the meeting, Sadat embraced Begin, embraced him and made a statement that was really quite interesting. He said that what divides us is a psychological barrier, and I'll quote, a psychological barrier between us, a barrier of suspicion, a barrier of rejection, a barrier of fear and deception, a barrier of hallucination around any deed and decision that is in fact 70% of the problem of Arab-Israeli relations. And later in the book, there's a description of Jerusalem as a terrestrial gateway to the divine world. And what that implies for me is that though we've been talking quite a lot about place as an interfusion of land, peoples, and histories, that there's another dimension of place. And that is an orientation toward a future. That there's something about place that implies an appreciation of the yet to be. He describes Jerusalem as a city torn into ribbons by hallucinatory forces. And yet, as Nusseibeh insists, we should recall with hope that the political divisions scarring the Holy Land begin in the religious imagination. Avicenna, the 10th century Islamic philosopher from Central Asia, who was the subject of Dr. Nusseibeh's doctoral dissertation at Harvard, made the claim that the world has no inherent nature. It is the best of all possible worlds, not because it could not have been otherwise, but because of the divine will. The divine will and expression of divine freedom. Avicenna also goes on to say that our human knowledge of the world could have been otherwise. Our way of understanding the world is but one way of understanding out of an infinite number of possible ways of understanding the world. And yet, Avicenna affirms, ours is in fact the best possible understanding of the world because it's an expression of a product of our human will, that is our human ability to exercise moral freedom, moral imagination. So likewise, I think we could say if we go to the Chinese side of the world, and I'll use Mengzi to kind of illustrate what I think Avicenna was saying and what I take away from Nusseibeh's work, and that is that our human nature consists, at least at some level, importantly, in the will to appreciation. For Mengzi, what that meant is that our human nature is not just to do the ordinary in an ordinary way. It's to do the ordinary thing like eating and turn that into cuisine. It's to take an ordinary thing like procreation and to turn that into romance and family. It's to take warning cries and calls for attention and to turn that into poetry and to song. That it is part of what we are doing in this life as humans to appreciate the situation, is to add value to it. So, Sari Nusseibeh's life, work, remind us that the hallucinations that divide us and that render us out of place have neither natural nor logical necessity. We can share in imagining their dissolution, willing new patterns of outcome and opportunity into existence by realizing values, intentions, and practices consistent with the possibility, the imagination, that all mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters can live lives of increasingly rich dignity and peace. Help me in welcoming Sari Nusseibeh.
Thank you very much. I couldn't have expressed my own ideas better. Thank you. And thank you also, and Roger Ames for inviting me to this conference, which is a great honor for me. And also inviting my colleague here, Micah Hendler, who has in fact shared with me the composition of this presentation for you tonight. Micah and I only came to know each other recently, and I'll be saying more about him as time goes along. But he's a graduate from Yale in International Relations and music. And well, he'll be explaining himself and what he does to you in due course, and so will I. But to go on, I also wish to thank all of you for coming here instead of going elsewhere. Tonight, I would have gone elsewhere myself, I think, as well. But so this is how it is. I want also to recognize, if possible, the person who put the idea of bringing me here to Hawaii into the heads of the organizers, namely to thank Arindam Chakrabarti, whom I have known for many years, and he's had this, I think, not just a want, but even perhaps an itch to get me to come to Hawaii ever since we met in Simla many years ago. And now he's been able to make it. So when I received the invitation and saw that the theme was place, to tell you the truth, I was a little bit confused. I wasn't sure what to speak about. It was rather, confusing. What can I say about place? There were different kinds of things I could speak about. And one thing that in fact came straight to mind was to talk about the construction of space, the geopolitical construction of space, which, as you probably know, is a very hot subject back home, reflecting the settlement activity by Israel. But it's a very depressing subject for me. And I resisted, therefore, from talking about it or carrying it with me all the way to Hawaii. I wanted to talk about something else. And so I was wondering what to talk about. And it was in this state of wondering that I got invited one day with my wife to an event to hear something called the YMCA Chorus for Youth. I don't know if that's right, so more or less. And so we went there and sat and listened to Micah and his group of young Israelis and Palestinians. And I listened and I watched and, got inspired. And it came together, the theme place and what I was in fact attending at the time. And it set me on a train of thought. It was, let me tell you this, it was like being until then standing in a train station, looking vaguely at the signboards and not knowing which train to take, which destination to go for. And then seeing Micah performing with his chorus somehow triggered the train of thought that eventually developed into what is now going to be presented to you, not as a philosophical paper, but as a form of philosophical, Micah said, engagement. It's a philosophical engagement, if you like, or exercise, or anyway, it's a journey, a philosophical journey on this train of thought. And I'm going to take you along with me and Micah on this journey, in this train. And so excuse me if it's a little bit strange landscape that we are going to go through together. So, as I say, it began with me sitting there. And it got me to thinking in the following way. I don't have any light here, I can't see anymore. Sorry.
There we go.
Okay. One's mind is one's private space, one's very self. Here, more than anywhere, one feels truly by oneself, alone with oneself. If one wished to retreat to oneself, to be with oneself, then here, more than the physical space one occupies in one's bed at the end of a hard day, more than the corner of the house or public place or private spot where one would retreat to for a moment of seclusion, would be where one will feel most at home with oneself. It is one's private and inner sanctum, one's own domain, for better or for worse, where nothing or no one can enter, where one is finally alone with oneself. More than any place, more even than any specially picked physical spot one feels most at peace in. This is where, ideally, and in the absence of otherwise of one's private demons, this is where that special feeling that one is at peace is felt, sensed, or breathed. This is one's real or inner home, one's private castle, for better or for worse. Now one asks oneself the question, what does this inner home, this private space, consist of? And let me here introduce a very elementary observation, whose significance may not have attracted the philosophical attention it deserves. Primarily, this inner home consists of sound. Sound in its variety of forms, whether originating from outside or that which originating from inside, as I ponder or think, sounds like sound, more than any other medium when I'm awake, is what primarily occupies or takes up the space in my mind. Sound occupies my head when awake in a way that other sensations, for example, light or smells from objects or images, whether concocted or recollected, do not. Now compare seeing a truck driving towards you with hearing the noise from its engine and movement as it churns closer and closer to where you stand.
So here's our truck.
Okay.
A truck, 3 ways. Oh,
Okay.
It just happened. Hold on a second. Here we go.
So the sight or scene, the truck itself, seems.
A normal truck.
So the sight or scene, the truck itself seems to stay outside, in front of you. Its movement taking place in the world outside your head. But its noise manages to transpose itself into your head.
So let's hear that.
I see no noise. I think you get the point that in fact the truck seems to be outside, but the noise goes inside. Imagine you're sitting or standing in the middle of a crowd or in an open field, taking in the torrent of sensations reaching you. All of it seems to have presence out there in the world, except sound. Whether this is the sound of the crowd, or the song of the bird, or the lapping of waves. These, of all that there is, have this uncanny feature of finding their way into your head. You hear them here, in your head. In contrast, you see things there. The crowd, the song, the waves, you see them there, outside of you. Now there seems to be a physiological explanation for this. A precise mapping in the ear membranes, a tonotopic map corresponding exactly with pitch frequencies that fires neurons in precise regions of the auditory cortex. In other words, of all sense data, sound, that is molecular vibrations from the external world, is replicated through electric firings in my head. In contrast, light gets translated through various neurochemical reactions by the time it reaches the visual cortex, making me see features of physical objects like color or even size or shape or whatever, which are not out there or which are not out there as I see them. The characteristic feature of sound, as that of light and of color, is that it is a specific combination of neurochemical reactions in the brain. Sound as such and color as such do not exist independently outside the brain. Even so, what sets sound apart from color is that the sound of the truck, its pitch frequencies, is audible inside your head, while the truck's other features, including shape, color, and movement, are visible outside. Inside my head, then, sound of all the other sensory impressions occupies a preeminent place. Even when wide awake and laid back absorbing a torrent of data of different sorts from the outside world and not preoccupied with performing a mechanical task that needs your full attention to orchestrate different functions of your organs, what maintains its status as anchor to all that data, if indeed it does not in fact supersede them, is your inner unspoken sound, that declarative sigh, that expression of pleasure or satisfaction, that thought that crosses your mind, addressed as a sound, sound, or what sounds like sound, then seems to be the primary material in one's mind. If we compare the amount of time we spend when awake by ourselves contemplating, recalling scenes, images, smells, tastes, with that spent in pseudo sounds, talking to, hearing ourselves, even as an image crosses our mind, we will find it is the latter, sound in one form or another, that takes up most of our mind space. A sound, received or articulated, can be a hymn, a sigh, a word, or an expression in a language, a conversation, a thought, a rehearsal for a meeting, a free-floating parade of incomplete ideas, and the like. Returning to the data that reaches us from the outside world, I'm here indirectly trumping a classical distinction between primary and secondary qualities. But I'm proposing to replace this with a distinction between sound and other sensations. This preeminence of sound is not a mystery. It has a biological origin. Of the 5 sensory faculties, it is hearing that first sensitizes the mind in its embryonic phase. It is the embryo's inner and then middle ears that first begin to form in the fetus. Its primary sensitization is to sound, not touch, smell, taste, or sight. Therefore, if one were to look for where or what to delineate as a beginning of a potential self, a place in the void in space, its elements would surely be sound. This is phase 1. But how does this happen? At one point, sound begins to separate. By week 24, in utero babies have been shown to turn their heads in response to voices and noises originating outside the mother's body. Until then, the potential self is just a bundle of indistinguishable sound, of noise. The whooshing of air through the mother's lungs, the stomach's rumblings, the noise from the surrounding environment. Suddenly, that's good, a faint demarcation line in this world of sound begins to form. The embryo begins to be sensitized to an other, a sound from an outside. This seems to mark a crucial juncture of phase 2, where what used to be a continuum now begins to separate. A response to an outside sound stimulus now being registered in a recipient. If one were now to look for what or where to delineate as a beginning of an actual self, this surely would be it. The separation, the alertness to an outside, to another place, a there, subtended by the disruption of a continuum. This seems to tell us that otherness, or the outside, rather than self-awareness, is a logically primitive notion, that the outside is the sounding board of self. Consider, were a baby to possess a Cartesian critical skills by then, it first couldn't make out an I. All there is muffled sound. There wouldn't be an I to anchor I think or thinking to, let alone to anchor I am to. It is the first awareness of or alertness to an outside, a there as opposed to a here, that kickstarts and accompanies the formulation and recognition of self. There exists an other world, an outside, therefore I am. I am is a response to an external stimulus. It is established that the embryo gradually comes to recognize particular sound patterns from the external world, primarily its mother's voice. Sensitization to sound discreteness, then sameness, or reiterations and patterns gradually develops. Together with this, in all likelihood, and as a natural extension of phase 2, comes sensitization to self-sameness. Composing recurrences of external sounds, sameness outside, develops alongside a composition of sound recurrences, a self-continuum, or sameness inside. The noises in my head come to define and demarcate the location in space where I develop a familiarity with myself. This is my original and ultimate space, my private sanctum. It is myself. Eventually, other sensory faculties kick in, all necessary for development: taste, smell, sight, touch. These, especially after birth, reinforce my sense of self. Their effects are processed through my brain, inside my head. But their processing, the firing of neurons, is indiscernible to me. I discern their effects in the different parts of my body. But what I continue to discern in my head, above all, is sound, that original stimulus that awakened me. Section 2. How much of the outside that I first begin to sense is incomprehensibly still me? How clear to me are the borders at first between here and there? As my sense or composition of self, of place, slowly expands, commensurate with my sense and composition of an outside, both positions, self and outside, seem to me to continue to occupy a single space. Eventually, as I come into the world, perhaps I come to view it as an extended single space. Extended, that is, to account for both the I and the relevant, the respondent other. I may first express this extension through claims I make. Typically, in the first instance, simply by screaming. Then, by screaming when hungry, feeling uncomfortable, or needing a change. My spontaneous screams in assertion of my claim are natural. They are the vocal or evocal embodiment of my identity at that stage, primarily a world of sound. Gradually, over time, my extended space expands still further as new compositions are made. A growing familiarization with my surroundings, sounds, tastes, smells, faces, my body, my home, my family, my neighborhood, my school, my friends, my city, my nation. All these felicitously being demarcated by acculturated sounds. The language, however expressed, that my initial screams and other sounds turn into. The world, the universe, though there, may still feel remote if sensed at all. But it is an open area, almost as endless, as borderless in its outer reaches, as the small room seemed to the embryo in its mother's womb. Within this seemingly open area, my extended space, literally the the iteration of positions or of places continues to expand. But as it expands, it also contracts. Other people, others' homes, others' families, others' neighborhoods, others' friends, cities and nations. All these take claims to what first seemed like an open area, making me retreat in my outgoing voyage through space to delimit my own borders. If I were a hunted animal in the woods, the threatening sound of drums caused by my hunters quickly eats away at the space I considered mine, causing me to run from the trap. But significantly, both the expansion and contraction in this open-ended area, though stimulated by an outside, are or happen in the mind. This must lead us to realize that space is a function of mind. It is not, in its basic manifestation, a function of an objective geography. It is not, in itself, a defined quantity. Undefinable, a no thing as it is infinite. Place, on the other hand, that definite spot where I run to hide from my predators, is itself definable and itself a position in that space. Is the mind space perchance analogous to or even coextensive with that open area, with the entire universe, its billions of neurons mirroring the billions of galaxies and stars? Is the world of sound in embryo, in advance of differentiation of an I and an other, analogous to or even coextensive with that of an embryonic universe? We tried to make you listen to those sounds as you came in, some of you who were coming in. And Micah will explain to you, because he has to do something other than just doing that. So tell them what it was.
Sure. Well, actually, what we were listening to, and you came in, were the sounds of space, but not actually, because they're not necessarily in the range of human hearing, but they're the waves that are emitted by various bodies in outer space, and also inner space, I suppose, translated to the range of human hearing. And so we were listening to the sounds of different planets or asteroids or the remnants of the Big Bang, or whatever was on that kind of spooky but very interesting recording.
Okay, so this is all downloadable on Google from NASA. So you
It's found it on YouTube.
And
Search the sounds of space.
It is surely mind-boggling to be told that the potential neuronic computations in the brain exceed in number the totality of particles in the known universe. One also wonders whether, if the claim about sound being what constitutes a potential self is true, the ancients were not all that mistaken when they ascribed the universe with a kind of soul, a universal soul, perhaps as many souls as there are planets or heavenly bodies. As you know, the old Neoplatonists and so on. In the picture I already drew, it would be, as a world of sound, that's the universe, a potential self, perhaps in a process of becoming. Section 3 now. If space is a function of mind, and mind is fundamentally a function of sound, space and sound thereby intertwine. The contours and features of space now begin to change as I grow older. What seemed large growing smaller, what seemed far growing nearer, what was uncharted or open-ended now coming within reach. Simultaneously, noise unfolds, the sounds entering my head and interacting there, slowly becoming sharper, more defined, numerically proliferating. Lullabies, turns of phrase, tones of voices, stories, conversations, subjects discussed, all these, in turn, fill out the space in my mind. In my growing sense of self-sameness, of my individuality, space and sound thereby come to intertwine. Gradually, mind, both its crystallizing I component and I's extended space in consecutive order, is what defines what I come to consider to be me and mine, my territory, my sanctum, my own. Certainly, my extended space, a region of familiarities and affinities, gradually comes to include stimulations from my other senses, faces, tastes, textures, landscapes, habits, beliefs, memories, as well as to include effects of my acts, prodigies, plants, machines, buildings, borders, flags. All these become signposts of my extended space, the territory I appropriate in space or in that space. The I component of mind comes to attach itself to this extended space as to be felt to be what defines its identity. But sound in its various manifestations remains an underpinning of this expanded space, best expressed perhaps by language in its multifarious forms, speech and song, as these happen to contain past and present narrational wealth, the personal and the collective, as all these come to constitute the underpinning sounds in my head. Which species or style of language is preeminent breaks down my territory within a language space even further, defining this in even more specific borders: close relatives, companions, co-workers, co-professionals, co-religionists, and those sharing my tastes, including that for music. My extended space comes thus to be circumscribed by different areas nesting one inside the other, eventually ending in that private space or sanctum I feel to be exclusively me, where no one but me hears what goes on inside my head. Now, all these observations invite us to define human and territorial identities in a different light, that is, not primarily in geographic terms. Were we by satellite or from a bird's eye view to define space in a particular region on Earth, say Jerusalem, as an example, in the manner foretold, this would certainly not correspond with the borders defined in a political map. Now, this is one possible sound chart reflecting an impenetration of spaces, each singled out by sounds.
So let me take a moment and briefly explain. I'm going to play that back in a bit more of an extended form and explain what each of those sounds are, because it's very complex and each one has a very specific meaning in the context of the other sounds as well, and Jerusalem. Here's our sound back. This first sound that we're hearing is the Muslim call to prayer, which in and of itself is many individual calls to prayer happening from mosques all over Jerusalem, roughly simultaneously. Now we add the church bells from the many churches and sects of Christianity that cohabitate, sometimes more and sometimes less harmoniously, within the old city, or even within a church. We then turn to the different sounds of Jewish prayer that compete for space at the Western Wall. First, this traditional Orthodox gathering, 150,000 strong, for special prayers before Yom Kippur. Now, these are the Women of the Wall, which is a feminist group that fights for the equal right to pray aloud at the same space. And these are the ultra-Orthodox rioters that are trying to drown them out with missiles and also sometimes physical violence. This now is the siren that marks National Days of Remembrance in Israel, from the Holocaust and the National Memorial Day, which signals everyone in the country to stop and stand still. Even cars stop on the highway for the duration of the siren across the country. And finally, the two frequent sounds of the ambulances that respond across both sides of the city
if you see the chart, this was picked up from a book that was done recently, basically identifying the areas, not in terms of anything but where the sounds are. Okay. So anyway, divided up, space can be specifically defined by language communities, even further by sublanguages, dialects, religions, music, for instance, etc. As already said, one must remain mindful of sounds expanding and contracting, or inclusive-exclusive effects on space. It is these together that define the spaces we just saw. The sound of a minaret can both extend my space, but diminish yours. More generally, sounds can bridge or divide, as language and language use paradigmatically can bridge or divide. A common language, that is, one which resonates between two or more minds, creates a common space. Disparate languages, that is, a sound space in one mind that fails to synchronize with that in another, are bound to have disparaging effects. I'm not talking here about national languages. We can both identify ourselves as Muslim and can speak Arabic to each other, but still find ourselves to be in totally opposite spaces. The sentence computations in one's mind cannot be made to hook onto or follow smoothly upon the sentence computations in the other. Wherever there appears to be convergence or correspondence, for instance, the same words being used, there's friction instead and repulsion. Or one can be Muslim and the other a Jew, unable to speak each other's language. Micah speaks Arabic, actually, so. But using a third national language, still find ourselves sharing the same space. How does this happen? Well, we compose. A common language is not a specific tongue, the third language we use. Also, it is not one in which the exact literal translation of the words from the two different languages is found and used in the third language. Rather, it is a communication path by means of which what one of us says can easily hook onto what the other can say in response, such that the conversation can proceed smoothly. If we were to use the word translation in this context, then it would have a special sense, not that of finding the word in one tongue that corresponds literally with a word in the other, but finding that continuing communication path that allows what one of us says to the other to be resolved into one or more expressions that the other can say back to us, without those response expressions constituting a dissonance in her overall linguistic field. For example, by challenging or undermining some sentence or group of sentences in her language that she strongly believes to be true. Strictly, this is not a conveyance of meaning, of so-called essences, but a resolution of meaning, of what one says in terms of new sentences the second can say back, in such a way that neither the spoken sentence nor its response can cause disturbances, respectively, in the overall consonance of the linguistic fields defining either speaker. These two fields can retain their consistency and coherence, reflecting the two speakers' personal positions and dispositions, even as their statements and responses go to and forth. Consider, for example, the sentence, Allahu Akbar. Have you heard it? The classical translation we normally find for this is, Allah is great. Analyzed further in the mind of one kind of respondent, the sentence can be read as saying, this guy is claiming that his desert Allah is greater than my civilized God. Literal translation here can miss the mark. It impinges on that respondent's linguistic field. But a different way of translating it, or of resolving it into a sentence that does not jar on the respondent, could be, God can overcome any injustice in the world, or, analyzed further still, as, justice reigns supreme in the world. This manner of understanding the sentence is also a translation, but unlike the first, which flashes a red light, it is a translation that upholds a communication pathway that allows the sentence by one to hook onto a sentence by the other. Understood in the latter sense, the sentence can evoke a positive resonance. Another example for a translation by resolution can be the response, "I'm afraid I've run out of coffee, but I can offer you tea instead," to the request, "I'd like some coffee, please." The respondent here sees the initial request as covering something more general than simply to be asking for a particular kind of hot drink. 1001 nights is the literal rather than the intended but general translation, countless nights. They can be 2000 nights, 2001 nights. Common language is not a translation of one language into another so that the other can understand it. It means having one language converse with the other. Paradigmatically, a dialogue between equal partners is reflected by a common language. A so-called negotiation between the powerful and the weak is more in the nature of a monologue, a set of take it or leave it directives. A common language synchronizes the sound spaces in different minds. Nurturing such a language or languages among speakers is a long and drawn-out process. Possibly in order to facilitate this process, hymn and song evolved, making sound a force of attraction, as well as an experience in sharing space. Come to 4. Anthropologists tell us of the primeval employment of melodious sound as one among other socially cohering factors that help to bring people together, making them share the same space. Primitive musical instruments to accompany words may well be used, but locutionary intonations can by themselves be sufficient and can vary. One person speaking softly to another can enhance a shared space. Poets and bards create a wider shared space, as separate individuals slip out of themselves and merge into one another, becoming captured in what now becomes a joint space created by the performer. Oratory has also been used to create a public, a kind of common mind, shared by different individuals who are swept up by the skillful creation of an encompassing sound space that, however momentarily, replaces the separate sound spaces that the individuals come with. So powerful is the attraction force of melodious sound that at the dangerous extreme it is shown in Greek mythology as a magical magnet enchanting Odysseus, literally pulling him out of himself and willing him to sail towards the island of the Sirens. In each of the above cases, the parameters of the individual sound space, what and where the individual sees herself, transform. So much so that, as in the case of Odysseus, one can totally lose oneself. In less extreme cases, which are far more common, a melody can so garnish an expression as to infuse it into the innermost core of the sound space of the listener, into their identity. Religious incantations stand out as obvious paradigms. Chanting a religious verse rather than reciting it or reading it out accords it a special status. A sense of awe it did not have when bereft of that melodious ring. Cognizant of this, the Quran literally demands that it be chanted rather than be read or read out in any other form. Other traditions, religious traditions, fare likewise. I'm going to here give you an example. So I'll just read this particular surah from the Quran, and then we will hear it being chanted. So reading it, I'd read it like this. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلُ إِذَا سَجَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى وَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. Okay, now listen. I mean, I think what I said didn't really convince you of anything, right? I mean, it doesn't sound good.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث.
I think Micah's next job is going to be a Quranic chanter. So melody takes on an even more powerful role in contexts such as the above, when groups share in the chanting or singing performance. Sharing a common space here assumes another dimension. It raises the level of a joint experience, the meeting of the private space into the public one, of the small self into the larger one.
I could also go to a gospel church.
So, as with all sound experiences, this elevation of level can have positive but also negative effects, depending on its purpose. To mobilize one larger self against another, or to transcend these contingent divisions and aim at nurturing our joint human space. But it can be used negatively. I mean, so this is an example. So they're saying the same thing apparently, but each one appropriating that thing for himself and against the other. Anyway, our train of thought is here drawing to a stop, first station. And but let me say a few more things before we stop to change the engines. What I want to say is that all these ideas or thoughts, observations that you heard, yes, I sing them. They're triggered in my head, as I was saying earlier, by the special concert given by the youth choir of the YMCA, which I attended some months ago. Now, I just thought this guy was brilliant. Imagine, he came out having graduated from Yale, has been now in Jerusalem for 4 years. He decided to just, commit himself to a mission, which is the setting up of this chorus of youth, Israelis and Palestinians. And he's been at it for the last 4 years. And, I was just awestruck. It's incredible to have people like that, and who give you hope for the future, and who are trying to compose, to bring together, creating a shared space. And I think he's someone really worth listening to, as you will in a minute. But the song I heard, are you going to put it now? Was this one. And we're talking about Jerusalem, and I'm talking as a Jerusalemite feeling a little bit depressed in my hometown.
الغفور.
Hold on to me as we go, as we roll down this unfamiliar road. And although this wave is bringing us along, just know you're not alone, 'cause I'm gonna make this place your home. Settle down, it'll all be clear. Don't pay no mind to the demons, they fill you with fear. Trouble, it might drag you down. If you're lost, you can always be found. Just know you're not alone, 'cause I'm gonna make this place your home. Settle down, it'll all be clear. Ooh, don't pay no mind to the demons, they fill you with fear. Trouble, it might drag you down. If you're lost, you can always be found. Just know you're not alone, 'cause I'm gonna make this place your home.
So now you can see how I was inspired. Here then was a tangible example stated, is that right? Being a function of mind and the letter of sound of the capacity of human self to compose a harmonious space, one that is inclusive rather than exclusive, of the ultimately illusory contingent divisions one finds in political maps. Now, of course, I must not be understood here as making the naive claim that political conflicts can be resolved by song or by song alone. The claim I'm making is this, that a deep understanding of what we are can afford us with more instruments to help us overcome differences. Places are composed by us, and it is in our power to make them resonate with one another, making the best use of sound, whatever the form of sound we use is. As already said, the process of humanizing our relations with one another is long and arduous, but one can make it shorter and easier by getting by with a little help of friends.
What would you think if I sang
Now, Micah.
a tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me?
So first, it's a great honor to be here, particularly as I am not a philosopher. I barely struggled through 2 semesters of philosophy and great books, and I understood almost nothing. So the idea that I'm here is kind of silly, but also I'm very grateful to you, Sari, for seeing the intersection and the resonance between the work that you're doing in the philosophical field and the work that I am in a musical field. I'll speak very briefly about what we do with the chorus and how it works, and how on the ground in practice the kinds of principles that Sari was discussing we see every day in our work, and where the challenge is, where the rubber meets the road, and how can you create something beautiful nevertheless. Sorry, it's just very low, so I'll do it this way. So the YMCA Jerusalem Youth Chorus is a musical and dialogue program for Israeli and Palestinian teenagers from East and West Jerusalem. Our singers come from over a dozen different schools throughout Jerusalem and its surroundings, and most of them never would have had the chance to meet, certainly not across the Green Line, except for their participation in the chorus, as schools, neighborhoods, and communities in Jerusalem are segregated de facto, except for a few special cases, between Arabs and Jews. Our chorus derives its power from our tripartite model that combines the community-building power of music with the individually transformative process of dialogue, all in the context of a performing ensemble that provides a clear, attainable common goal that demands effective listening and teamwork from our singers. Today, I'm excited to focus on our musical process and go deeper to demonstrate the challenge and the promise, as I said, of the principles that Sari explained so well, in exploring the relationships between sound, space, and self, and how they combine to create a sense of place, maybe even a place that could be a home for everyone. Our case poses particular challenges, even beyond the political, as I will explain, but the resulting uniqueness of the sound space that we create derives its power in many ways from this challenge. So I'll explain briefly. When people first hear about our work with the YMCA Jerusalem Youth Chorus, they usually get the idea that music can bring people together, even across lines of conflict, but usually attribute this power to the idea that music is a universal language, which is false. This could not be further from the truth. Music, as we said before, is a concept that sound can be organized in a way that creates meaning of some kind for a listener. And this concept of organizing sound has been developed differently by different societies throughout history and has resulted in forms of expression and organizational principles that sometimes share common elements, but are sometimes so unique and culturally specific that they're utterly incomprehensible and even incompatible across traditions. For a specific example that I deal with on a regular basis in the chorus, take the idea of the quarter tone, which we heard a lot of actually in the Quranic recitation that Sari played for us. Western classical music has developed based on the half step. Da-da. So think about Jaws. Da-da, 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 right? That's a half step. In Western classical music, the half step is the smallest step between notes of a traditional Western scale. However, in Middle Eastern classical music, whether in the Arab world or also in Persia and elsewhere, this music developed based on the idea that there are actually intervals smaller than a half step, whose precise interval varies regionally and stylistically, but that for now we'll call a quarter step or a quarter tone, which is basically half of a half step, without which musical expression is utterly impoverished. So I'll sing what I mean. In Western music, the first 3 notes of a scale, we'll say do, re, mi, can be sung in a variety of ways to begin different modes, or the sets of notes from which songs are built. The most prominent modes in Western music are major and minor, which share the same do and re qualities, but whose mi's differ by half step. So pay attention to me. Here's major. Do, re, mi. Okay? Do, a dear, female dear, na, 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 na. Okay? Do, re, mi. That's major. Here's minor, with the same do and re, but a mi that is a half step lower. Do, re, mi. Okay? So that's a half step difference between mi. If you come from a Western musical background, you can probably already tell that the second one, minor, do, re, mi, sounds sad, where the first one, do, re, mi, sounds happy. If you come from the West, those are your two options for me. Everyone's following me? Me. However, in the Middle East, you have more options. In Middle Eastern classical music, you have modes that use the major set, called ajam, do, re, mi, and the minor set, which they call nahawand, do, re, mi. But they also have a third option that is in between major and minor, and it's called rast. And it goes like this, do, re, mi, right? It's like in between. Now, when I first learned that, it totally blew my mind. Because I'd grown up singing in many choirs and playing the piano and all kinds of different settings, knowing that this mi, or any other note like it was either sharp, too high, or flat, too low, and basically needed to accommodate itself either to major or minor because it was wrong. But for people who grow up in a Middle Eastern musical frame of mind, life without rast and the concept of the quarter tone is like living in black and white without color. Now that was a very long discursus, but it's really important to understand and hear as an example that undergirds one of the many fundamental differences between Western classical music as a tradition and the Middle Eastern classical music tradition. Both are but they're both based on this fundamental concept. And as Sari mentioned earlier about sound more generally, certain sounds can establish my space and not your space. Same thing with music, particularly when the fundamental building blocks in the relationship are defined to be completely opposite and sometimes even mutually negating. The idea that this sound that is color and expression is wrong, right? And this is just the beginning. The discrepancy in building blocks correlates with a broader structural difference between Western classical music and Middle Eastern classical music, in which Western classical music is a predominantly polyphonic tradition of many voices, in which the half step allowed for the building of perfectly tuned harmonies between voices singing different notes, moving independently, without which music to the Western ear also sounds devoid of color, without harmony. Middle Eastern classical music, conversely, is a heterophonic musical tradition, primarily, based on the ornamentation and expressiveness of the melody, without harmony. And that harmony gets in the way of that. The primacy of melody works well with the added expressiveness of the quarter tone, but is a fundamentally different organizing principle than that of harmony. In the chorus, we have singers who come from each of these starkly different musical traditions and more, some of which intersect more easily than others. The trick here is nevertheless how to create a shared space through the joint production of sound that can hook onto, as Sari said, both Western classical structures and Middle Eastern classical structures and resonate with all of our singers. To make this place, the chorus in which they sing, home for all of them, not just through the social values upon which our community is based, but through their application in the very music that we sing. Now, it's important for me at this point to also take a minute to acknowledge my own limitations in this quest to create a musical space that can meaningfully contain multiple traditions. I have always been fascinated and moved by musics of many cultures and even studied many of them in different countries, but primarily my training and background is Western. Moreover, the concept of a chorus, as we know it in the world today, is a fundamentally Western concept based on polyphonic structures of singing and harmony. So while we've sought from the beginning to be as inclusive as possible in our creation of a shared musical space, the chorus began with a fairly Western normative structural basis, with Middle Eastern melodic or rhythmic elements featured as highlights, so that everyone had a space, but kind of in a different way. Now this is the case with Home, for example. The video that we saw is a pretty straightforward contemporary a cappella arrangement of an American pop song in English, to which I added opportunities for Middle Eastern highlights, the opening and closing improvisations in Hebrew and Arabic, and the darbuka drumming that comes in at the end. Home functions as the chorus anthem because of its message and because of how we use it in the chorus to deliberately reinforce that message, but not necessarily because musically, structurally, it is really the end goal of where we want to be. But in the 4 years since our founding, we've sought to continually push the envelope musically, not just by providing a space for everyone, but providing a fundamentally equal space for everyone. Also, recall the image where you have the two people and sort of one sound bubble is overriding the other sound bubble. So we're hoping to get more to a shared sound bubble that has a gradient and interacts in different equal ways. What this means, actually, and we're just still on the process of figuring out really how to do this because no one really is doing this, is that if everyone is going to have to learn how to hold a harmony part, everyone also is going to need to learn how to sing quarter tones. If everyone is going to learn how to read music, or at least be able to follow written music, everyone is going to need to learn how to improvise without it. And that has led us to some pretty cool, innovative musical spaces that are pretty unique in the choral world, regardless of all of the political things that are going on. Just musically, this is very interesting stuff. For an example of a few of these different structural possibilities and their power, I want to share with you a clip of the first original composition that we wrote as a chorus. And it was the culmination of an intensive integrated musical dialogue process last spring over several months, including an intensive weekend retreat and many, many, many special workshops, as we performed it at the Yale International Choral Festival last June. And at this point, I'm going to gauge your sense of things. The composition itself is extremely powerful, and Sari thought that I should play it from the beginning to the end and explain it as we go along. It's 10 minutes long. But if you like, I can just play clips. What do you prefer?
Do it all.
Do it all? All right, we're going to play it and I'll describe it as we go. I will give an opening paragraph, and then actually in the piece itself, I speak as well to the audience as to how they could come to understand what we're about to do, because it's kind of far out. But basically, this piece seeks to capture, through our singers' own voices, the journey that they go through in the chorus. And it has a number of different musical images that each provide a different space for joint musical reflection on the chorus experience. And in each image, the concept of musical dialogue between musical cultures or even across boundaries of verbal and musical language is at play in a different way. Special because it's a song that we wrote. It's not really a song, it's more of a composition. And it really weaves together so many different voices and so many different experiences and styles of music and ways of singing and messages and places where people come from and places where people want to go. And in many ways, it really summarizes the journey of what it's like to be in this chorus, in a unique group like this, where we take people from so many places who are never supposed to meet at all and create something together, and what that means, what that feels like, and where we can go. So in this image, we have two improvisers from different traditions. One performing in Arabic mawal, a vocal improvisation, Muhammad, and Aviv, our saxophonist coming from a jazz background, supporting each other and painting a musical picture of the backgrounds that they bring with them musically to the chorus, and how with listening, even these different languages can attune to and even support one another. So in this second image, we have two singers, again, one Israeli, one Palestinian, this time both rooted in the musical language of hip-hop. But they're engaging in a different kind of dialogue because Eden is singing a song of despair. She's asking in Hebrew, she's asking God, Ayeka, where are you? But Amer is rapping about relentless optimism as almost an answer across languages, but within the same musical language to what she is singing. So in this section, the chorus, if you will, we asked our singers to write a sentence inspired by the question, what is something about this chorus community that I want to spread in the world through my voice? And we created the space for each singer to add their individual voice to form a collective soundscape of what makes our community special. Now, the first time that we put all of these lines together, improvisationally, having no idea what it would sound like, with no one else knowing what the other people were going to sing, at the end of our months of co-creative composition work with dialogue about what all these things meant also, it felt like nuclear fusion. It had taken so much effort and work to meaningfully fit all of these distinct voices together in the same space. But once they were combined, the amount of energy released was really uncontrollable. Our singers couldn't stop singing. actually started dancing. And even then couldn't stop until I stopped them because we'd started this already 10 minutes after rehearsal was supposed to be over. And this had gone on for another 15. We'd reached something extraordinary together, organically and authentically, that resonated across the group about what their chorus experience meant to all of them. So when they asked me afterwards, wait, are we going to actually do that on stage? I said, yes. Thank you. Another social boundary that I love challenging with the chorus, and we do this in almost every performance, is the division between the performers and the audience. The idea that certain people are good enough to sing and others should not sing and simply listen in awe to those who are good enough is a concept that too often deprives even really good singers of the right to their own voices. So we often turn the mic on the audience, as it were, and create together on the spot to really take the next step in creating an inclusive space in which all can feel the right to contribute their own voices. And it works every single time. Our audiences always rise to the occasion, often defying their own expectations of themselves, in joining together in a spontaneous singing community. So that's what we're about to do right now. So we are going to use some of the musical techniques that I described earlier to bring out the broader message that Sari and I hope you take away from this presentation. That we should never blindly let our traditions define us and limit our ability to interact meaningfully with those from elsewhere, but that we can always seek to find the hooks between traditions, the resonance between experiences, and ultimately the humanity in all of us. But since this is the East-West Philosophy Conference, we are going to do this with some philosophical ideas so that our musical practice resonates also on a philosophical level. So Sari picked out some lovely phrases for us to sing. Sorry, could you explain why you chose these phrases?
Just wait a minute here. Stay here. Okay, so Micah's idea was to go vertical and horizontal. So for instance, on one side, on one column, to pick up a couple of people from the Western tradition, and on one side, a couple of people from the Eastern tradition. And the idea is that one assumes that if you go down one column, it resonates with one another. But in this case, what we did was to put one thing on one side that resonates from one thing on the other side. So, Well, we said, you know, the Bishop Berkeley thing, to be is to be perceived, but I thought seen would go down better. And Suravardi, which we heard something about earlier today, instead of coins, to be is to be the value of a variable, what he says is to be is to be a light. And it goes with to be seen. Now, Locke, you know, in the final analysis, when he discusses ideas, he finally gives up and says, you know, the idea in itself is I don't know what. And actually, on the other side, from the other tradition, Avicenna also defines the final analysis as something well open to infinite possibilities, actually. Okay, so we thought, you know, they resonate with one another horizontally. And now it's your turn. What do you want to do with that?
So I was trying to think what we could do with that, and it'll be a lot of fun. Also, there were a number of bold musical volunteers who offered to help me, so maybe now is also your time to help empower the audience as well. So if you can just come and stand here, and I will distribute you shortly. Let's start with the idea, a thing in itself. Okay, can we say that? A thing in itself. We have to say that in rhythm. A thing in itself. A thing in itself. A thing in itself. All right, we're doing pretty well. Here we go. A thing in itself. A thing in itself. Again. A thing in itself. Again. A thing in itself. Great. Okay, so we're already doing the impossible. So good job, everyone. Now, we'll take another idea. To be is to be. Let's do that. Ready? And. To be is to be. Again. Ready? And. To be is to be. Okay? So just with those two building blocks, you can create many different melodic possibilities. Okay? So you can say, to be is to be a light. To be is to be a light. Again. To be is to be a light. To be is to be a light. To be is to be a light. Great. So that's excellent. That's one idea. Then you can have to be is to be seen. To be is to be seen. To be is to be seen. Good. To be is to be seen. Again. To be is to be seen. Excellent. Okay, so let's say for now we're going to have this half of the room sing to be is to be a light. 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 Keep that up. Keep going. Can you two of you go over and help them? To be is to be a light. To be is to be a light. And we're going to go to be is to be seen. Ready? To be is to be seen. 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 Okay, so that's one idea. Okay, that's a building block. That's a resonance, perhaps across traditions. Now we're going back to a thing in itself. A thing in itself. A thing in itself. Again. A thing in itself. So I was thinking, what would these longer phrases sound like from the different musical traditions from which these people came? So if you're thinking maybe from the British Isles, you're thinking that Locke is maybe doing a jig of some kind. A thing in itself is I don't know what. So let's try that. A thing in itself is I don't know what. Let's do it again. 2, 3. A thing in itself is I don't know what. Let's do it again. 2, 3, 4. A thing in itself is I don't know what. Okay, so that's excellent. And if we want to fill out the space, we can do a thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself, a thing in itself, a thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself, a thing in itself, a thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself, a thing in itself, a thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself, a thing in itself. Great, okay, so that's awesome. That was the hardest one, by the way. And then for the last one, let's say Avicenna, if we're saying a thing in itself is just itself, maybe the reason that Locke couldn't figure it out was because he couldn't hear quarter tones. So a thing in itself is just itself, right? It's just the rust, the quarter tone. So let's try that. A thing in itself is just itself. Right? Let's do it again. 3, 4. A thing in itself is just itself. Okay? So now, we're going to have this side of the room is Avicenna and you are Locke. Okay? So you're doing a thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself, a thing in itself, a thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself, a thing in itself, a thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself is just itself. I don't know what. A thing in itself is just itself. I don't know what. A A thing in itself is just itself. I don't know what. A thing in itself is just itself. Okay, so that's pretty good. So you've got this dialogue now across traditions here. And now we're going to do both at the same time. Excuse me? Okay, so we're now going to take each of these halves of the audience. We've now combined you like in that chant-off video. You're now like vitriolically opposed to one another. And now we're going to split you even further, so really you don't know who you can trust. So here on this side, you're going to have, what were the two things I had you doing before? There's a thing in itself as I don't know what, and to be is to be a light. Okay, so the front half here, you're going to be is to be a light, and the back half, you're going to be a thing in itself as I don't know what. Okay, so can one of you go back and help the back folks? Now over here, you are, what are you? I don't know what. You are, to be is to be seen, and a thing in itself is just itself, okay? So the front half here is going to be is to be seen, and the back is a thing in itself is just itself, okay? So we're gonna build each of these one at a time, and just keep looping it until it feels solid, and then we'll add the others, okay? So we're gonna start with, actually, we're going to start with the back, just doing a thing in itself, 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 a thing in itself. So keep going. Good. Now we're going to be is to be a light, 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 from a to be is to be seen, to be is to be seen, to be is to be seen. Good. To be, front half, keep going now with block. A thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself, a thing in itself. A thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself. Get ready, have to stand up. A thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself is just itself. A thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself is just itself. Four more times. I don't know what. A thing in itself is just itself. A thing in itself is I don't know what. A thing in itself is just... Two more times. Thing in itself is I don't know what. Last time. I don't know what. The thing in itself is just itself. All right. Sari wanted to call our presentation Philosophical Entertainment, and I felt that was a little demeaning, but maybe it's appropriate. So I'll just say, at least for me, thank you so much for taking the time to listen to what we had to say, and to what we had to sing, and to what you had to sing. And I don't know if you wanted to close with anything, Sari, but other than that, I'm just grateful for your time and your thoughts and your voices, and hopefully this was interesting and entertaining and sounded good. So, thanks.
We've never done this together before.
I was going to have Sari do a solo, but eventually I let him off the hook.